Victor Wembanyama just dropped 12 blocks in a single playoff game and his team still lost. That's not a storyline. That's a 5-alarm crisis with no fire trucks in sight. 12 blocks. In one game, the most in playoff history ever recorded. And the San Antonio Spurs walked out of that building with a loss. A 104-102 gut punch that should have every Spurs fan staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, questioning everything they believe about this franchise and its future. Because what happened in that building wasn't just a tough playoff loss, it was a warning shot. A loud, unmistakable signal that something is structurally broken around the greatest defensive prospect this sport has ever manufactured. Before we go any further, there is a number buried inside this game that nobody in the mainstream basketball conversation is touching. A number so damning that when you hear it, it is going to completely reframe how you see this front office, this roster, and the terrifying direction this situation is heading. We will get there, but there is also a popular assumption spreading through the basketball world right now about Wemby's overall game that needs to be surgically destroyed with hard data before it takes root. Because if that assumption goes unchallenged, people will misread this crisis entirely. Stay locked in. Victor Wembanyama did not just block shots in Game 1. That framing is lazy, and it undersells what actually happened on that floor. From the opening tip, he fundamentally altered the geometry of the Minnesota Timberwolves' entire offensive system. Every drive they attempted near the paint had to be recalculated in real time. Every lob they schemed got erased before it reached its target. He finished the night with 12 blocks, 11 points, and 15 rebounds, a triple-double, a historic triple-double. The kind of performance that decades from now gets pulled out of archives when people try to explain to a younger generation what watching this era of basketball actually felt like. The kind of night that should have ended with a win, should have, didn't. Now, here's the assumption that needs to die right now. The take circulating in comment sections and sports radio across the country is that Wemby is still raw, still a project, that the blocks are spectacular and the highlights are real, but the overall game has exploitable holes, that he's not quite there yet. That framing is not an opinion rooted in analysis. It is simply demonstrably, factually wrong, and the numbers will end the debate instantly. His defensive rating this season ranked inside the top 5 among all qualified big men in the entire league. His block percentage is not just elite by modern standards, it is historically unprecedented for any player at 22 years old at this point in their development. Go back through the record books. Look at Dikembe Mutombo at the same age. Look at Ben Wallace, Rudy Gobert across his multiple Defensive Player of the Year campaigns, Serge Ibaka during his peak shot blocking years. None of them were here at this age producing at this level in this environment against this competition. Wembanyama is not trending toward greatness. He has already arrived. The data confirmed it. Game 1 put a stamp on it, and while he was making history, his teammates were busy falling apart at the seams. In Game 1, the San Antonio Spurs shot 38% from 3. On the surface, that number sounds manageable. Dig one layer deeper, and it becomes a catastrophe, because that percentage was carried almost entirely by early game production. When the stakes climbed highest, when the margin shrank to a single possession, and the game was sitting right there ready to be taken, the role players went completely ice cold. Possessions evaporated, late game execution dissolved into isolation attempts, rushed decisions, and missed assignments that compounded on each other like a slow-motion collapse. A game the Spurs controlled for long stretches somehow ended in a 104-102 loss to a Minnesota Timberwolves team that, by every honest metric, did not deserve to walk out of that building with a victory. Say that clearly and out loud. The Timberwolves did not dominate this game. They survived it. They absorbed everything Victor Wembanyama threw at them defensively and still couldn't manufacture a comfortable lead. They won because the Spurs handed it to them in the final minutes. There's a massive and structurally important difference between a team winning a game and a team simply receiving one. When a franchise with a generational defensive anchor gives up a 2-point playoff game in the closing minutes, that is not a coaching adjustment problem. That is a roster construction problem. That accountability lives upstairs. Now, that buried number I promised you, the one that changes everything about how you see this front office. In the final 6 minutes of Game 1, Victor Wembanyama was on the floor for every single possession on both ends, with the series opening statement hanging in the balance. What did his defense look like in that window? The Minnesota Timberwolves scored just 8 points across those 6 minutes of high-pressure playoff basketball. 8 points against a team with legitimate offensive weapons, with everything on the line in the most intense moments of the game. That is not just elite performance, that is the kind of defensive anchor that franchises build decades around. That is exactly what a cornerstone is supposed to deliver when the game is being decided in real time. The San Antonio Spurs scored 6 points on the offensive end in that same 6-minute stretch. 6 points. The best defensive player on the planet held his side of the court together completely, and the supporting cast generated 6 points when they needed stops and scores simultaneously. That is the crisis distilled into its purest, most brutal form. Wemby did everything, and the people around him did almost nothing. This is structurally never a Wembanyama problem. The question now is whether the San Antonio Spurs front office fully comprehends the urgency of what they are holding, because history in this league is vicious, and it does not wait for organizations to catch up to their own talent. Generational players reach a threshold, they look around at the roster surrounding them, they calculate the trajectory, and they make decisions. Kevin Durant gave Oklahoma City everything he had for years, carried them to a finals, watched the infrastructure crumble around him, and then walked. Anthony Davis spent the better part of half a decade dragging dysfunctional New Orleans Pelicans rosters through mediocrity before forcing his way to Los Angeles. James Harden in Houston, Kawhi Leonard in Toronto, and then again in San Antonio before that. The pattern is not a coincidence. It is a documented, repeating failure mode that organizations keep stumbling into while telling themselves they have more time than they do. The Spurs committed to a full rebuild, and the logic was sound at the time. Tank strategically, accumulate draft capital, land the generational prospects, develop him properly, build the supporting cast carefully over time, clean process, smart franchise management on paper, but paper doesn't play playoff basketball. And watching Game 1, watching a young star rewrite the all-time playoff record books in real time, while the organization surrounding him cannot close a 2-point game in crunch time against a team they should be competing with directly, patience stops being a virtue. It starts resembling negligence dressed up in front office language. Tim Duncan won his first championship at 23 years old with a roster that was deliberately, aggressively constructed around his strengths. Shaquille O'Neal didn't get his first ring until 28 and spent years watching organizational failures nearly swallow his prime whole before Los Angeles finally built the right structure around him. The San Antonio Spurs, of all franchises on this earth, should understand what it means to honor a generational talent properly. They spent 2 full decades doing exactly that with Duncan. They sacrificed, they made hard decisions, they refused to waste a single year of his prime, and produced 5 championships, a coaching legacy, and a standard of excellence that the entire league measured itself against for a generation. They are not meeting that standard right now. They are nowhere near it. Victor Wembanyama handed this franchise 12 blocks, a historic playoff triple-double, a defensive performance that has no equal in the record books, and walked off that court carrying a loss that he did not cause and could not have prevented alone. That loss belongs to the roster around him. That roster belongs to the front office that assembled it. And right now, that front office needs to look at what happened in those final 6 minutes of Game 1 and understand with complete clarity that the window on one of the most extraordinary individual talents this sport has ever seen is already open. Then windows in this league always eventually close. So drop your answer in the comments right now, and let's actually settle this. Is the San Antonio Spurs front office already criminally wasting Victor Wembanyama's prime years with a roster that isn't built to win? And if they don't make aggressive win-now moves this offseason, is Wemby already quietly becoming the next superstar the league fails, one bad supporting cast at a time?